Hello and welcome back to the Bookshelf Odyssey, and welcome to the Ray Bradbury Short Story Club. Now, this is about The Jar, which should have been out at the end of July, but I went on vacation before I was able to have time to record the video, so here it is now, a little bit late, but as a wise man once said, better late than never. We'll be talking about The Jar. There will be spoilers, so if you haven't read it, go ahead and read it now and come back. I read it from the Ray Bradbury Everyman's Library edition. I think there's like 100 stories or more in here. It's a collection of fantastic Ray Bradbury stories. So today's story is called The Jar, which I love as a title because it doesn't tell you much about what the story's about. So already you have Bradbury giving you intrigue and mystery. And this is influenced by one of his writing tips, which he says, if you're struggling with writer's block, if you're struggling with wanting to have ideas, create a large list of nouns. And so he would write lists of nouns. And this, I believe, comes from one of those lists. The jar. Well, what is the jar? Where is it found? What's in it? And suddenly, as you think about that, all of these great writing prompts and ideas come to mind. How would you write a short story if all you had as a writing prompt was just called The Jar? And so by asking those questions, it helps you engage your creative side and forms a story. Asking those questions myself, I can see how this story came about. There's a jar. What's in the jar? Where did it come from? We don't know. What's in it? We don't know. What impact does it have on the people who come and see it? We don't know, but we see that as the story unfolds, there's a lot of mystery around it, but there's a lot of interesting insight into human character, of greed, of hate, of feeling left out. And it's what Bradbury says in the story is really, really fascinating. Its publication history, it was first published in Weird Tales in November of 1944, and then it was republished in Dark Carnival, his first collection, which is the order of stories that we're going through right now. It was also republished in the collection The October Country, which is kind of a reprint with some changes from Dark Carnival. And then it was also in 1964, it was adapted in the Alfred Hitchcock Hour as an episode of that series. Without further ado, let's go ahead and jump into the story. The opening pages I find to be, again, some of the most beautiful things that Bradbury has written. It's atmospheric and it's very vivid. Let me go ahead and read some of that to you. It says, "It was one of those things they keep in a jar in the tent of a sideshow on the outskirts of a little, drowsy town. One of those pale things drifting in alcohol plasma, forever dreaming and circling, with its peeled, dead eyes staring out at you and never seeing you. It went with the noiselessness of late night, and only the crickets chirping, the frogs sobbing off in the moist swampland. One of those things in a big jar that makes your stomach jump as it does when you see a preserved arm in a laboratory vat." Charlie stared back at it for a long time. We are introduced to the main character, Charlie. He's essentially, and to put it maybe more crudely than Bradbury did, he sees something interesting in a jar at the carnival, and he really wants to buy it. For some reason, it just speaks to him, it calls to him, and he wants to buy it. And so he makes a deal to sell it for $12. He buys it and he takes it home. And on the way home, he catches the attention of some of the local men. Their curiosity is piqued about it. You get the sense that he is a kind of an outcast. And now that this is something that people are actually paying attention to and are paying attention to him. And maybe that feeds a little bit of his ego. When he gets home, he shows to his wife, Thede, and she doesn't like it. And I think she's angry that he spent $12, which was probably a lot of money back then. Well, it was a lot of money back then. And, she says that it looks like you, and she runs out of the room and slams her bedroom door. You get the idea that their marriage is maybe not in a good place right now. She finds the thing ugly and repulsive and says it reminds her of Charlie. But it's attracting attention. People are coming to him to want to see it. Time passes and people come in to just sit and stare at the jar to talk and discuss what could be in it. What is it? It's Bradbury continues to describe it in little glimpses of this grotesque thing floating in this fluid as to what it could be. A character named Gramps talks about what it could be. Another character named Juke Marmer has really a horrifying story to tell, and I would put a trigger warning on this if you don't want to read about violence against animals to maybe skip this part. But I won't be graphic with the language, and I don't think Bradbury was too bad, but it was just this horrifying story about how they would deal with barn cats and too many feral cats, breeding, and they would have to put them down. But unfortunately, they did it by some pretty gruesome ways, by drowning them. And I think Juke, maybe when he stares into the jar, he feels guilt, and he's reminded of this terrible thing that he did as a child because his parents told him to. His mom, I think it was, told him to. And now he still carries that guilt, and seeing that thing in the jar brings back feelings of guilt to him. To Gramps, it brought feelings of mystery and curiosity. Another character named Jadu, he's described as a black man from Heron Swamp. Jadu thinks it could be something like maybe the thing that we come from. He looks at it and he sees maybe the origins of life, that it's the primordial sludge that we all have come from. Charlie brings up an interesting hypothesis that it could be somebody that maybe we knew, that maybe there's a young kid who wandered off and drowned in the swamp, and they've collected his body and put it in a jar and has brought it back, which then leads Mrs. Trodden to think it could be her little boy Foley who drowned in the swamp. And she just panics and whispers over this and yells at this jar, wanting to see if it was her child. So this has turned from the grotesque to the emotionally horrifying now. And as they watch the jar, then they think they see something moved. Another man named Tom Carmody, just is very dismissive of it. He thinks it's nothing. He thinks it's fake, and that Charlie had been conned by this carnival man. Anyway, Tom and Thede, they sneak off. They go to the carnival. She comes back and she taunts him with information. She says it's just junk, that it's fake. And you begin to suspect that maybe Tom and Thede were up to more than just going to the carnival. They were going to the carnival, wink, wink, nudge, nudge, if you know what I mean. But for some reason, his wife is so angry at this jar and that he spent money on it, and that she thinks it's nothing. And this man she's probably having an affair with thinks it's nothing. It drives Charlie insane and crazy to where we get this really horrifying ending where he gets so angry at her. He comes close to her and she's telling him to back away. And he says, "Just want to show you something, Thede." His voice was soft, low, and insistent. "Here, kitty. Here, kitty, kitty, kitty. Here, kitty." And then the scene ends and it goes back. Everything's the same again. But Thede isn't there. Everyone comes in and stares, and everyone comes and sees something different again. But then, suddenly, they think, wait a minute, are the eyes a different color? Is the hair a different color? And we find out, that Thede is off. Charlie says that Thede is off visiting her folks. And you begin to put two and two together, like, wait a minute, Charlie, what did you do? Tom Carmody is there, and he says that he alone, seeing things about the jar he never saw before. Everybody seeing what he wanted to see. All thoughts running in a fall of quick rain. And I think Tom is beginning to realize what might have happened. But again, can we trust that? Because it seems like everyone is seeing that same thing from a different perspective and coming to different conclusions, which I find to be a very fascinating subject, which I think I'll talk about in a minute here. But just to wrap up the story, it ends in the same way or a very similar way to how the story began. And Charlie basically says, well, I guess we'll never know what's really in it. And it ends by saying it was just one of those things they keep in a jar in the tent of a sideshow on the outskirts of a little drowsy town. One of those pale things drifting in alcohol plasma, forever dreaming and circling, with its peeled dead eyes staring out at you and never seeing you. So what's it all mean? Well, to start with, I want to share a quote from Cliff's Notes. And they write that it's one of the finest examples of Bradbury's macabre writing. The jar sets the tone for the many so-called carnival stories that were to follow. In these stories, carnival imagery is the major source for Bradbury's discussion of the presence of evil as a threatening force in the world. The jar reveals Bradbury's belief that the potential for evil as well as for good dwells within each person. The evil nature of the jar is suggested early in the story when the carnival boss admits that he had been having strange thoughts about the jar. Then the night meetings at Charlie's are described as a kind of rude church gathering where the townsmen sit with reverent awe, gazing at the jar. Also, the embryo in the jar is depicted as being a holy grail-like thing. Here then, the nature of religious worship is juxtaposed with the implied evil nature of the jar, indicating that either of the two is possible. Yet, the fantasies that the characters engage in concerning the thing in the jar indicate that for them, evil is so strong that it has taken precedence over the good. Implicit is Bradbury's warning that this disguised evil can be a potent possibility unless humanity is careful to cling to that which is good. I thought that was an interesting insight into the story. It's like a presence of good versus evil. And maybe, Charlie opened the jar to take out whatever was in there and, put his wife's head in. I don't know. You're kind of left hanging. You're left with many unanswered questions, but Bradbury's able to do that so perfectly well. I was reminded of maybe the story of like Pandora's box, where inside of it contained, all the evil in the world. And if you open it, it would pour out into the world if I got the story right. Something, contained that's very dangerous. And maybe by opening that jar of evil, Charlie has released something very evil inside of him. I like how everybody saw something different, that they saw one thing that was true. They all saw the jar. They all saw the same thing. But how they interpreted it was different based on their experiences. Mrs. Trodden thinks it could be her little boy who drowned. She looks at it and she's reminded of sorrow, of pain, of suffering. Juke, Marmer, he drowned kittens as a child because his mom made him do it. And perhaps he still carries that guilt. And when he sees the jar, he's reminded of the evil of that act. Different things like that. And the jar itself is what you could say it made Charlie perhaps kill his wife. Maybe it just reflected what was already in Charlie, what he would have done already, with or without the jar. It was more of just a spark. And in that we have, I think, some classic examples of temptation. When you talk about, especially in a church teaching about temptation and how, Satan or demons will tempt you to sin. I heard a pastor once say that he thought sometimes we gave the devil too much credit for our sin, that really all he does is present us with opportunities, but we're the ones who make the choice. Which I think is interesting that, perhaps this jar, it didn't make anybody do anything. It just presented opportunities. It reflected the truth about different people and their thoughts and what they experienced. But what I think fascinates me the most is to go back to, again, this theme of we are all looking at one thing, but we're all interpreting it differently based on experiences and beliefs and conditions of our heart and of our soul. And that's so interesting, in light of what we interpret today, what we hear from the news, what we hear from different behavior of different politicians. what they do what they do. How we interpret what they do can be very, very different. It could be, and I don't want to get too much into politics, but you have a politician that does a thing, and the one side says that was evil and horrible and terrible, and the other side says that no, that was wonderful and perfect and right. And you're on two sides of this issue. You're both looking at the same thing, but you're coming to two very different conclusions. That's, I think, an interesting part of the story, that the chaos this jar caused, or at least revealed, that was already there just by existing. And there's no debate about it. It was a jar. It had something in it. But was it something real? Was it fake? Did it contain evil? Or was it just a device, a MacGuffin, if you will, that brought out all the evil that was already there, or all the pain that was already there? I don't know. Interesting thoughts. I know they're kind of rambly, but I'd love to hear what you think about this story. Okay, our next story we'll read is called The Lake. This will be the fourth story in Dark Carnival. You can find it in the collection of The October Country, or an omnibus collection like the stories of Ray Bradbury. So go ahead and read The Lake. This story is one that has a lot of sorrow in it. It's not so much a ghost or macabre story, but it's very, if I remember right, it's very atmospheric and gloomy, with a lot of heart to it, a lot of emotion to it. I think it explores the idea of loss. So if you're prepared to deal with that, I would encourage you to read it. Another one of my favorite Bradbury stories. This collection, Dark Carnival, man, it comes out swinging with home run after home run. What a great collection. So I will have that video out at the end of August. As I said, this video should have been at the end of July, I hope. But if not at the end of August, early September. I'm trying to keep a regular schedule, but as you know, life happens. So be on the lookout for this one next. The Lake. I hope you enjoyed the jar. Comment below what you thought of it. What you think might have been in the jar. I'd be really interested to know that if you were reading it for the first time, and what it might say about you, if you're willing to share. All right, that'll be it for today, for July's edition of the Ray Bradbury Short Story Club. Look forward to talking to you more about these classic stories of Bradbury. So until next time, take care and happy reading.